Good afternoon. My name is Paul Remillard, and I'm the director of the Florida Bar Center for Professionalism. The date is January 18th in the year 2000, and we're at the Supreme Court in the chambers of Chief Justice Major B. Harding. The purpose of our visit today is to talk about professionalism in conjunction with the historical video series. Ladies and gentlemen, Chief Justice Harding. Justice Harding, thank you very much for inviting us into your office and your chambers to take this interview. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional career?
Surely. I was born in 1935 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Grew up there in a home comprised of 3 boys and a mom and dad. And after I went through public school, I went to Wake Forest, then college, now university. And it was while I was at Wake Forest that I began to realize that I needed to make some decisions about my future. And fortunately, one of those decisions was to go to law school. And I went to law school. I was the youngest person in my law school class. And my real property professor had a wonderful time always referring to me as the major who was a minor, because the age of majority then was 21. I changed that in October of that year and reached my majority. Another interesting aspect of my law school was that there were many in my law school who had served in the Korean conflict, and their education had been interrupted, and they had either come back after the conflict was over and completed their undergraduate degree and gone into college, or come back after having completed their graduate degree or their undergraduate degree and went to law school. And I think that the maturity of a lot of those people who had experienced the time in the service, and particularly those that experienced time in Korea, was a very interesting factor and feature in my law school career.
Why did you choose law school versus another profession?
Well, upon reflection, I think it was divine intervention. At my young age, I probably did not possess all the maturity I needed to make as intelligent a decision as I might otherwise have, but I began in my junior year of college to realize that upon my graduation, one, I was going to be drafted, and two, that I was really not prepared for any particular career, that I could probably get out and get a job after I did my time in the service. My father grew up across the street from the dean of the law school, and I went and talked to Dean Weathers, who encouraged me in my decision to go to law school, and I'm just very thankful and happy that I did.
Do you have any mentors that helped you along in the way?
Well, upon graduation from law school, I did have to go into the service, and I was delayed in that process from June when I graduated and August when I took the North Carolina bar to the following March or April. And my wife and I had gotten married the last year of law school, and she was expecting a child, and so my mother and father-in-law in Jacksonville were kind enough to, quote, take us in until I had to go into the service. And my father-in-law was a lawyer, and my brother-in-law was a lawyer. He was very nice to allow me to clerk for him. He was semi-retired and had failing eyesight, And so I was able to live with them, with my wife, and then I would work for him and clerk for him, do some research. And I think that experience was very beneficial to me, and in having the opportunity before I did go into the service to experience what it was like to practice law.
What did you learn from him in those few months?
I learned that the best way to win a case was preparation. And he was a very meticulous and a very thorough lawyer. And I learned that preparation was the best thing that I had going for me in a courtroom.
Any heroes that have influenced your life?
Well, a lot of people have had an influence over the course of the years. My father was in the steam and hot water business, and he did an awful lot of traveling during my formative years. My mother was able to stay at home and raise the boys, and we were fortunate to have a very innovative mother who tried to teach us good values and good principles of living. And she also was able to translate that into real life in very unique ways. She was a very visual person, and she oftentimes used object lessons and things like that to teach us many of those things I remember to this day. And oftentimes, too, when she would have to discipline me, I won't tell you how many times, but she would discipline. She would take time afterwards to sit down and try to explain in the scheme of life how my conduct impacted the other people involved, or her, or the family, or those sorts of things. And so I have many recollections of sitting very painfully on the ottoman of what we call the big green chair, which in our home was the seat of judgment.
Is there any one lesson that perhaps you have carried with you and given to your children and grandchildren?
I think probably the lesson that she instilled more than any others was no matter what you do, it's going to have some impact on someone else. And you have a responsibility, and in our situation, being raised in a family of faith, that it was our responsibility to be sensitive to other people and to what their needs were and to what their concerns were, and also be sensitive that we did not offend.
How long have you been in the legal profession now?
Since I graduated from law school in 1959 and passed North Carolina bar in August of that year, and then took the Florida bar in March, I think, of 1960.
So we're talking 40 years.
Close to it.
Can you tell us how you've seen the legal profession change, and if you believe that was for the better or for the worse?
Well, I think probably the most significant change has been the numbers. In 1960, when I became a member of the Florida Bar, there were 7,812 members. And today there are over 60,000 members of the Florida Bar in good standing, 48 or 49,000 of those residing in Florida. It is very difficult, like moving from a small town to a large town, to know each of the other lawyers in the practice in your community on as qualitative a basis as you were able to know them in the early in the early 60s. So I think numbers have significantly changed. I think economics has also changed, and there have to be dollars for all of those thousands of lawyers, and thus competition has created a significant factor in the practice of law. And I think it is in the area of competition that oftentimes we find many of the problems that are attributed to the legal profession. If I can go back for just a minute, you asked about heroes and heroines. I think probably aside from my wife, to whom I've been married for 41 years, her mother had a very significant impact. She was what I termed an unflappable woman, and she always had a positive outlook and very strongly suggested that no incident or occurrence could come along that would be greater than our ability to resolve or to understand. And she was just a very wonderful person that influenced our lives together, my wife and I, very much. And I've always been involved in the church. That's been a very significant part of our life and our heritage. But during the course of all of those years, there have been pastors that have been able to translate the message in much more significant ways than others. And a pastor that we had in Jacksonville in the late 70s and the early 80s probably had more influence on my walk of faith than anyone else. And I don't know whether you would classify these people as heroes. They would probably be surprised if I did. And but when I first began practicing law in Jacksonville, we did not have a formal mentoring program. But I knew that there were two places I could go to get help. There was a cafeteria in down on Bay Street across from the courthouse called the Baymar. And there were lawyers that went there for breakfast most every morning that practiced trial work, criminal and civil. And a wonderful group of lawyers. And there was always a feeling if I ever had a question about how to proceed or what to do in a particular case, that I could go and get a cup of coffee at the Baymar, and they would just be more than willing and helpful to resolve that issue. And then at another eating establishment there in the Greenleaf building in Jacksonville, there were always a group of lawyers who did primarily business. And if you ever had a problem in that area that you needed some counsel and advice, you could go there and they would just be more than willing to help. And I came into the profession at a time when I felt that freedom to be able to go and ask. And my experience was that the help was always there, ready, and a willingness to give it. So to those extent, those folks have helped along the way, and maybe not in the category of heroes or heroines, but significant people in my life.
It sounds like you had an informal mentoring process which may be lacking now with the numbers of lawyers here in Florida.
I think that's true. And I hear young lawyers, even those that are in firms, oftentimes wish that they had the freedom to go to senior members of the firms or more experienced members of the firms, but there somehow in the culture is oftentimes a reluctance. I think that that's not universal, but I do think that it is oftentimes a practice.
I'm told that the numbers of lawyers now practicing as a sole practitioner right out of law school is growing. Would you be for some sort of a mentoring program that could help them, maybe initiate them in the same way that you were initiated back in Jacksonville?
I certainly would, and I have pondered how, considering the numbers, this could be done on any type of a consistent basis. And I don't know whether it can be organized as such, but I think it would be wonderful if we had a cadre of experienced lawyers who would be willing to make contact with younger lawyers and to try to instill in them the values of the profession, and also to be able to help them, or at least tell them where to go to get help in particular problems.
What recommendations can you give to judges, lawyers, and law schools on how to improve the legal profession or legal training?
Judges and lawyers, in my judgment, have as much responsibility for teaching as does a law school. And we are seeing a group of, a generation of people coming up into the profession with an entirely different worldview from that which I had and maybe even my children had. But it would seem to me that if we as judges and lawyers as lawyers would take an active role in teaching lawyers what it's like to be a lawyer, not only a lawyer, but a good lawyer, we could greatly enhance the profession. And I think the public would benefit from it, and I think the bar would benefit from it. The generation oftentimes comes up with little or no teaching as to what is expected of them as lawyers. And I think we're beginning to see a change in the law schools in that regard. But I think we need, as active practitioners, lawyers and judges, to be responsible in this area of teaching.
How active do you think that lawyers and judges should be in that particular task?
I think they should be very active. And I know that in dealing with the Center for Professionalism and dealing with many of the professionalism seminars, that oftentimes the people who fall into this category of younger lawyers are not in the audience and are not participants in learning. And I think we really need to, as I know you are in dealing with this issue, we need to explore alternative means of getting the message out to those practitioners that are sole practitioners. They oftentimes feel they just don't have time to devote an afternoon or a day to this subject. But the truth of the matter is they don't have time not to. So I think that judges and lawyers should be very active in this endeavor.
What recommendations would you like to share with the law schools initially as to what you would like to see new or different in law school training?
Well, I think we're seeing some significant changes in that. But I think the law schools in the past have not felt a very strong role in teaching concepts of professionalism and civility. And of course, a lot of these things are things that it's pretty hard to teach to someone over 21 that never has had a focus on them before. And so to that extent, I think it is important that we devote our efforts to, in the law schools, to teaching what is expected of people. The practice of law is oftentimes a dispute resolution process. And I can tell you from over 31 years of being a judge that those disputes that are brought to the court well prepared and well presented and with a sense of propriety, respect for the court and for the other counsel, and a sense of civility, courtesy, and those attributes, the issues are better decided.
What things are the legal profession doing correctly now?
Well, I think the emphasis on professionalism is one of the most significant things that we're doing correctly, and I think that is because it might have been generated because there was a real need, and whatever its genesis or whatever caused it to come into being, I think that professionalism, the emphasis on it is very important and very significant. We, I think, cannot look at the profession without realizing that technology is a significant part of what's happening in the profession now. And how technology can enhance the profession is still being tested in many venues. It's being utilized in court in many different ways, experimentally and regularly. And so I think that we're going to be seeing some significant changes utilizing for good technology, and that will also help in making better decisions along the way.
What areas do you think that we can improve on now?
I think that there still needs to be a considerable improvement in the way people treat each other within the profession. And when you see what goes on in the movies, on the television, in the magazines, and the abusiveness of interrelations between people in a professional status as well as in combat, it's very difficult for that not to become this is the standard or this is the way life should be lived. And I think we have to just consciously be aware that this is a very serious issue, and it impacts significantly on the way we resolve disputes. I would think that it would be a help if lawyers could understand that they're not only being prepared for a profession that is primarily for the benefit of resolving disputes, but lawyers are very significant, in my judgment, in preserving a way of life that we in this country have enjoyed since our Constitution was established in 1787. We are a significant country. We have a court system that all of the Eastern European countries are seeking to model in some form or fashion. We have a profession that is just remarkable in its ability not only to help resolve issues, but lawyers in pro bono service and things of that nature are giving to the community in so many ways. And if we are not careful, and if people lose confidence and trust in the system that these lawyers represent, we may well lose our way of life.
To go back to your mother's advice that everything that you do has an impact on others, what do you think the impact upon the profession has been with some of the discourtesy and some of the way we treat each other now?
I think people have a significant lack of trust in the products of our system. If this is the way you come to resolution of conflicts, the resolution probably is not good. And so I think it has significant impact.
How would you define ethics in the legal profession?
Ethics in the legal profession consist of those rules which govern our conduct. And those are the rules of professional responsibility or conduct that the court has adopted for lawyers. Those are the rules that tell you not to steal or misrepresent and establish attorney-client privileges and things like that. Those are the ethical restraints that govern our conduct as lawyers and professionals.
How do you define professionalism?
I probably cannot do so in one word, but professionalism is that additional component. A profession is a calling for which you have to have special training and is generally for a public service. And so ethics are the rules by which we must live in order to be able to maintain our life within this profession. But professionalism calls you to do more than ethics. It calls you to do more in consideration of those others involved in the system, other lawyers, parties, judges, and give a sense of civility, respect, and courtesy, consideration to them, and to realize that your reputation as a lawyer depends in large part on your reputation as a person. And if you treat people with respect, they will be able to listen more attentively to what you say and hear and understand what you're saying. And so professionalism is that step beyond ethics that oils the wheels for the dispute resolution and helps it to go more smoothly.
What are your core beliefs that have helped you throughout your life?
Well, I think, as previously mentioned, the teaching that my mother gave me in the big green chair, and also the teachings of my faith that we are to love God with all of our heart and soul and mind, and that we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that does not indicate that our love or concern should be conditioned on what they do. Of course, it makes it easier to love someone who's nice and respectful. But we have a responsibility, and I think this carries over into every aspect, hopefully, of my life, that we consider what we do and its impact on others. And I think that is one of the responsibilities that we have in carrying out that faith.
Finally, Now, if you were absolutely guaranteed that your advice would be followed, what advice would you give to those in the legal profession?
Wow.
King for a day, so to speak.
King for a day. Well, I think that I would recommend as my first edict would be that all people should be well prepared when they go to court, to include the judge. And secondly, that that process would be carried out by people who have a legitimate concern for the profession, for their clients, for themselves, and to recognize and understand that what they do in the protection of individual rights and liberties, and what they do in the resolution of disputes that come before the court, is a strong thread in the fabric that has held our country together for these over 200 years. And so I would like for all lawyers and judges to realize that, that what they do must intentionally be geared to not only the case that they're dealing with, but also to the entire system, so that we can preserve this way of life that has been so beneficial to us.
Justice, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate you giving us your thoughts on professionalism.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure to be with you.